Thank you very much. What a lovely welcome. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the research I've been doing and the stage that I've got to with it. Those of you who were at the meetup last night, you sort of saw the episode before this one. So we'll do a little bit about so far on Isabel Evans Does Research at the beginning of this, just to catch those of you up that haven't heard about it before. So I'm going to be telling you some stories. These stories, thank you, are going to weave in and out. And it's going to be a story about Anna. And Anna built a tool to use for herself. And then she suddenly found that everybody else in the organization was using it. And she was having to support this tool for other people to use. And that wasn't in her job description. And it's a story as well about Bill. Now, Bill was a test manager. He's using a vendor tool to support some of his testing. And they've offered him an upgrade. And that upgrade, they're saying, is going to help him solve some knotty problems he's got with certain types of bug. So should he get that upgrade or not? And some stories about Cam. Now, Cam was building tools for a tool vendor. They were designing a new feature for this particular tool. They knew exactly how the users were going to apply it. They knew what this feature needed to be like. And by the way, Anna, Bill, and Cam are personas. I've made them up from interviews and survey responses and workshop output and case study output. They're kind of an amalgam of different people. But the quotes are from real individuals that I've used to make up those personas. It's also a story about me. Now, lovely introduction, and yes, this is not my first time at Hustaf, and it's a delight and lovely to be back with you. I've had a long history in IT. So I did my degree in my computer science degree in the 1970s, and I was a programmer. And then in the 1980s, I came into software testing, and I did software testing, and then later quality management, and then back into software testing, and then became a consultant and a trainer and so on and so forth. So I'm nearly 70. I've had 40 years in the industry. And around about the 2010s on into the 2015s, I was thinking, I keep seeing these problems over and over again with shelfware. What's causing this? I must be able to work this out. And I became convinced that it was a usability problem with the tools. But I wasn't absolutely certain. And then I had the great luck of meeting Mark Mikulev and Chris Porter from the University of Malta, who started talking to me about research. And I realized I needed to research this properly. So I started into academic research. So I hadn't got an academic background. It's been such a learning curve. And do you know what? In the process of doing this research, I found errors in all my hypotheses. All the things that I thought, no, not all the things, a substantial proportion, one of the things they've taught me is not exaggerating, a substantial proportion of things in my hypotheses about what was going wrong were incorrect. I'd made assumptions. I'd seen one example and goes, oh, it's always like that, and other things that we so often do. And I also found a lot of unexpected evidence. And I also found that academic research is very slow and very exacting and very robust. So, bringing you up to date on what I've done, reaching the point of this talk. My first research question was, what are testers' experiences with tools? I was very firmly told I couldn't ask, what are your problems with tools? Because that already tells them what sort of answer I'm expecting. So what are your experiences? So 2018 to 2020, I was hypothesis building. And the 3 papers that came out of that were called Stuck in Limbo with Magical Solutions, Scared, Frustrated, and Quietly Proud, and Test Tools, An Illusion of Usability. Because what I'd found was, I'd thought usability was the problem. And it was. But actually, part of the problem with usability was people implementing it superficially. A very, very pretty user interface, but nothing behind it that actually supported testers in carrying out their work. So it was a really interesting finding. And coming out of that, Chris and Mark and I started discussing, do we really know who's doing the testing? Because it looks like there's quite a lot of different sorts of people with different experiences answering those questions at those workshops and so on. So between 2020 and 2023, I was accumulating evidence, and a paper that's just come out in July, which is what I talked about at the meetup last night. It's called Breaking Tester Stereotypes. It's about the range of people that there are working in testing. So coming out of that, we started thinking about, would people-focused approaches to design of test tools actually help? I've got a paper coming out in November called Communicating Heuristics, which is the follow-on to what I'm talking about today. But actually, in the last 2 years, I've been building and evaluating a set of heuristics to help us with designing, building, and indeed choosing test tools. So I'm going to show you that this is quite a rigorous process. So there's me in the middle thinking, and I've got some jigsaw puzzle pieces in my head. And I'm collecting data with open questions. I'm doing what's called qualitative analysis. So I'm looking at detail, at the stories people are telling me, and I'm picking out nuances from those, and I'm doing what's called thematic coding. I'm looking for patterns in large quantities of data in order to help me build a hypothesis. And I'm taking that back to academia in research papers to say, is this research robust? And iterating. And my goodness, they don't let anything past those academics with papers. I mean, I've had papers rejected time after time after time with people going, no, that's not rigorous enough. No, where's the evidence for this? You cannot make that statement because nothing else in the paper backs it up. And you go back and you rework it and you rework it, and eventually they say, that's good now. We'll accept that. We'll accept that as a piece of evidence. And I'm doing what's called member checking, which is where I go back to participants, i.e. testers who took part in giving me information, and say, have I interpreted you correctly? And I'm designing the heuristics, and I'm asking, is that useful? So I've been prototyping, and that was an experience because I had an idea of what the framework was that I wanted to build, and the prototypes just destroyed that completely. I was just wrong. And I spent a long time going around in circles, building and rebuilding and trying to model the data, trying to understand what was going on in test tool design. And then an intervention from an academic who is an expert in human-computer interaction from another university just said to me, have you thought about heuristics? And I could have hit my head. Of course, heuristics. And having designed the heuristics, I've been doing expert reviews and case studies and usage studies. So I've been taking them back out into industry. So they're still changing. I've got an evidence-based framework of heuristics, and it's still fluid. It's not complete yet. Now, I've designed 12 heuristics. I'm just going to say, by this time next year, there might be a different number of heuristics because they collapse and they split out according to what's happening. But at the moment, it's 12, and they're in 3 key areas: why, who, and context. And these heuristics I've communicated as questions. And again, deciding how to actually design the heuristics. Alex's keynote this morning, she got heuristics laid out in a certain way. And if you look at Nielsen's heuristics, they're laid out in a different way. And if you look at what Cassandra Lung's done about her heuristics, they're laid out in a different way. So I looked at lots of different heuristics, and I tested the same heuristic communicated in different ways, as a picture, as a question, as a statement, as a directive, and so on and so forth. And what I came up with was that for this application, it looks like asking questions is the best thing to do because it broadens people's thinking. And there isn't one right answer. That's why I was having trouble with trying to do a framework before I got onto the heuristics. We need to ask ourselves questions and interrogate quite deeply into those questions to come up with the answers that are right for us. And these questions in the 12 heuristics are questions that the evidence in the research shows we forget to ask ourselves. And a key thing here, which I'll say several times, is people who are buying tools forget to ask why they want them. What problem are they supposed to solve? And people who are building tools, and indeed test automation, forget to ask who it's for. Very typically saying, well, it's for me. And it's for people like me. So, and everybody forgets to think about the context might not be the context that they themselves are working in. So the first of these heuristics is, why is this tool needed? It's such a simple question, isn't it? It's a really simple question. But there's another bit on it, which is, and why else? What are your goals, and what problems are you trying to solve? They could be to do with money, or time, or quality, or wanting to reduce your team size, or the number of people you're employing. It could be some other goal that you've got. And when you look at what problems you're trying to solve, actually a good question is, well, actually, is there a problem? And actually, if there is a problem, is it one that the tool will solve? I'm seeing some nods around the room. And I'm telling you, though, there's some really interesting examples. Like, we got this tool, and it didn't help us. Everything was just as bad as before. And it's not always like that. Sometimes people were saying, we got this tool, and it really helped. But, you know, you've got to know what the problem is you're trying to solve. And the key thing here is that different people have different goals and different problems. So it's not enough just to ask, why is it needed? Now, I've got a GitHub repository, and there'll be some QR codes, which I hope work. I'm just going to say, it's the first time I've done QR codes, and I'm just going to say they worked on my machine. But hopefully those QR codes will take you through to the GitHub repository. With each of the 12 heuristics, you can click on it on the opening page. So you've got the list of heuristics. You can click on it, and it takes you through to a page. So there's the first of the QR codes. So H01, why is the tool needed? And on the underlying page, you've got information that adds to this. So you've got additional sub-questions. You've got evidence from the research that tells you why this question's important. So one of the things was nearly 30% of the challenges with implementing tools were to do with management and organizational problems. It wasn't the biggest group. Actually, usability related was the biggest group, but it was pretty blooming significant. And so, for example, one of the bills said, actually, there's several organizations within our organization. Our audit team versus our dev team have got completely different views about what's appropriate for this particular set of tools. There were some things to do with security testing, and they wanted to do some stuff around passwords and password mocking. And it was kind of like you could see those two teams. The devs were going, yeah, this will work. The audit's going, what? You're doing what? No, you can't do that. And then, as well as the additional questions, the things to think about, the evidence from the research, I've also put in a list of activities. So if this is one you need to deep dive into, I'm not telling you how to do these things, but I'm saying, have you remembered to do a cost-benefit analysis? Have you done a SWOT? Have you done a gap analysis? And I've put you links to useful information you can find about that. Not that I've written, kind of, it's like, here's a place on the internet to save you doing immediate searching. So that H01, you've got a whole bunch of information. The second question is H02, who will use or be affected by this tool? Now, this is an interesting one because it's not just the person sitting there at the keyboard using the tool who's affected by it. Some people need to supply information coming into the tool. Some people are going to use information coming out of the tool. They are also affected by the tool. Some people are affected because they might think they're going to lose their job. They're affected emotionally. They're threatened. Other people are affected because they might see an opportunity to grow their career. So there's all sorts of things to think about in that. And this was an area that people were not thinking about very deeply, it seemed, from the evidence in the research data. So it's got a number of extra heuristics with it. The first one runs right under H02, which is, who else haven't you thought about? And then we've got things about people's experiences, communication needs, learning goals and learning preferences. Do you want to master this or do the next task? Do you want your information as a video or in text? That type of thing. Different people have different goals, so you have to go back and visit the goals again as you've found the people, and different people have different contexts. So if we look at HO2, again, there's a QR code. This is something that I talked about yesterday. Only 6% of the testers participating in this research conform to stereotypes about what IT people are like. The people that they're using these tools do not conform to IT stereotypes. And, oh, the QR code's dead. I'm so sorry. It worked when I did it. I've just noticed that. It's very disturbing having the questions coming up. People may be affected without directing using the tool. And conflicting usages. So I mentioned Anna earlier. She said, I wanted to solve this one problem. And then other people had exactly the opposite ideas about what this tool was for and how to use it. Completely different audience. And you can do things like stakeholder mapping, personas, and archetypes. And then we look at communication needs and preferences, media speed, level of detail. This was a good one. This was an interview. And I remember this particular Bill said to me, he said, it's been, and he just looked away, he said, there's no source of truth in the project. There's 4 or 5 different places you have to look. One of the things you might look at, because obviously there's a huge range of people, is you might look at taking up something like disk profiles, not to profile your end users, but to say, well, there's 4 basic disk communication styles. Let's give one of those to each of our personas. And you might look at inclusive design methodology to think about accessibility requirements, which are very particular. And then context is the third area. Where will the tool be used? And where else will it be used? And along with that, in what workflows? With what risks? What level of autonomy have people got? Christopher was talking about autonomy. People haven't always got autonomy. When will it be used? And how long for? Are we building this tool to use this week and then we're throwing it away? Or are we expecting it to last over the next 3 years and we need to think about maintainability? And that's a question that people really forget to ask. I'm running out of time. Different people have different contexts, and different contexts mean different goals. So if we look at where will the tool be used, one of the things was that people were stuck in limbo. They were mandated to use tools, but then actually they had no access to the technical environment where the tool was working. Literally, people were having to pretend to use the tool and then get somebody else to post things in via a spreadsheet. People were using the tools outside offices, the most extreme being in a field. So you need to think about the geography, the technical environment, and the physical environment. One particular usage case, one example, the person designing the tool had this idea that everything was going to be on the cloud, but when we looked at it, 1/3 of the people on that project did not have good internet or mobile access. 1/3 of the people. It was like, that wasn't going to work. It might look modern, but it's not necessarily practical. So, QR codes, I'm going to hold my hands up. Maybe those aren't going to work either, but they'll lead you to the repository. I've got a quick list of the heuristics, which is just the 12 of them on a PDF. On the repository, it also has information about how to use the heuristics. Very importantly, people talk about non-functional testing. I can't bear that phrase. I talk about quality attributes. I pulled out from all the evidence which quality attributes are the ones that people most had problems with. So on the repository, they're in an ordered list with the evidence on which of the heuristics will help you with sorting out those quality attributes. And you can find more about the research. So where are they and what's my route through? I'm just going to repeat. If you're designing a tool or building test automation, think about who it's for first and then think about why. But if you're acquiring a tool or doing a tool strategy, think about why you need it and then think about who. and in neither case forget about the various contexts. So if we look at Anna, there was a particular Anna I shared the heuristics with as in a review, and she'd built a tool to use herself, and when she saw the heuristics, she said, I'd have done that completely differently if I'd thought about those questions before I started. But then she paused and she said, maybe I wouldn't have built the tool at all. So here's a key message. If you're just building a tool for yourself, just build it. But when other people start using it, then maybe it's time to look at the heuristics. Bill used the tool to evaluate the vendor tool, and the discussions, it was about a 3-hour discussion he had with the testers, and then they did an evaluation, and they suddenly realized the bugs were not caused by anything that the tool was going to help with. They were already finding those bugs. The problem was the bugs weren't getting fixed. It was a communication problem about what was important. They changed the way they were communicating, and that changed that solved the problem. It wasn't the tool that was needed. Incidentally, saving themselves quite considerable license costs. Bill remarked to me that if I'd moved, at that point, our return on investment question was down towards the end in the how long are you going to use this for. On his request, I moved it up to heuristic 1. But he also said to me, if we'd done the return on investment at the beginning, maybe we wouldn't actually found out about the communication problem, so it was still worth going through all the heuristics. And when Cam used the heuristics to evaluate the prototype for the feature, they realized they'd missed out 2 whole user groups that they hadn't thought about, and they needed to go back and revisit that prototype with those other user groups. So what's the next steps? For me, I've got to complete this, case studies, expert reviews, write up my thesis, submit, have a viva. Maybe one day in the future I might graduate and come back as Dr. Evans. And then I want to make this off the GitHub repository into an infographic, book, website, podcasts. I'd like comments from you. I will rectify the thing about the QR codes and get it back out via Heuristics to you by their website. And I want to know what formats you'd like it in, who you'd like to see reviewing it, and any mistakes I've made, like non-working QR codes. Huge quantity of acknowledgements and thank yous. So many people have helped with this. So many people have contributed to surveys and workshops and interviews and all sorts. So heartfelt thank you to the industry for that. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Isabel, for this great presentation. Not too much time left, but let's see the first one. What is your favorite test tool and why?
Oh, I could be glib and say my brain, because actually I think that's the most useful tool. Do you know what? I don't have a particular favorite test tool. I'm quite old-fashioned. It's my age. I constantly return to paper and pencil. Constantly, that's where I want to be. And that's very old-fashioned of me.
I love paper and pencil. What should a project owner do if it turns out that the design of the test automation system was selected incorrectly? Only ways to start over?
Well, it might be worst case, mightn't it? But it would be worth going through the heuristics and trying to identify why it isn't fitting. And that could well be it's not a problem that the tool can solve, or it's a different problem, or it might be to do with training. So one bit of evidence that came in was a company where the developers had been given 3 months to become conversant with a test framework, test automation framework, but the testers were only given 3 weeks. I was kind of like, well, are you surprised, given they're also less technical, that they found that difficult? So I think use the heuristics to help you identify where the problems are.
Okay, we have the link for the QR code, but allow me to choose the last question, which I love. What is your dream for the future?
Oh, that we really, really value the cognitive effort that testing takes. And we really, really value that every single human being who is taking part in a project really wants to do their best. I always feel that one of our roles as testers is to help everybody, help the developers, help the business analysts, the project owners, actually be their best. That would be my dream.
Ladies and gentlemen, Isabel Evans, a huge applause for this wonderful...
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the questions.